Good evening. Welcome to the February 8th, 2012 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I'm Jack Reisenberg, Chairman of the Commission. At this time, I'd like to introduce the other members of the Commission. To my far left, Commissioner Culbertson. To my immediate left, Commissioner Anderson. And to my right, Commissioner Newman. From the city staff, Ms. Zerniak is here tonight. Our first item of business is approval of the minutes from the September 14th, 2011 Plan Commission meeting. Are there any corrections or requests for clarification? Hearing none, do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. The next item before the commission this evening is a public hearing and action on the consideration of a request for approval of a tentative plat of subdivision and the associated special use permit for the Spiel Planned Preservation Subdivision. Are there any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts by members of the commission? Okay. Presentation, we're getting a lot of feedback on this. Is this sounding okay, by the way? The microphone? Doesn't it sound a little boomy? Any presentation by the petitioner? Oops, we just lost it.
You're on.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready?
You know, let's wait till Kathy gets back.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the Plan Commission. My name is Chuck Byrum. I'm a lawyer with the firm of Meltzer, Pertil, and Stell, and I'm representing the petitioner tonight, Bob Spiel, as trustee under the Robert Spiel Trust. The order of presentation has really been determined upon technological skill, and since I have none, I get to go first because the balance of it is going to be a little bit more high-tech than I'm capable of. Mr. Spiel is the owner of a 10-acre parcel at 270 Westleigh Road in Lake Forest. It's on the north side of Westleigh, right across from the Red Fox intersection, and it's zoned R4, but it's in an overlay district. It's the Historical, Residential, and Open Space Preservation Overlay District, which is a special overlay that's been bestowed upon areas of the town that have historical significance or natural significance. And the reason for this is to make sure that there's excellence in design and use and in planning for these types of properties. And this does fall, the Spiel property does fall within that district. And what this district does, it places a premium on planning, design, and efforts to preserve open space and natural features, which is what we're attempting to do and what you're going to see tonight. But because of this, ordinarily we'd be seeking just approval of a plat of subdivision, a tentative plat of subdivision, which Mr. Spiel is doing, but at the same time we also need a special use because it's in the overlay district. So you're going to be asking to make your recommendation on two things tonight, the tentative plat and the special use. What Mr. Spiel would like to do would be to subdivide his property into 6 lots of various sizes through the city zoning ordinance. One lot will contain the Spiel residence with Mr. Spiel and his wife Gail, who have lived there for many years. They live in a Stanley Anderson home built in 1947. That will remain on one of the 6 lots and will not be disturbed. The other 5 lots that are going to be created will be vacant, and they'll be capable of having homes built on them later. Because it is the Spiel home site, he very much wants to make sure that the homes that are built there in the future are custom designed homes, and that's what the plan is. There will also be 3 outlots, detention and landscaping on one, private street on another, and a cul-de-sac island with 2 mature premium oak trees on them. Mr. Spiel, in putting together his request tonight, has drawn upon the skills of 2 consultants who are very, very familiar faces in Lake Forest. as far as these types of subdivisions are concerned. They've planned them, they know what kind of plans to put together, and all the issues that are involved in these, and they've had a very good track record doing them. One is Mr. Mike Bleck of Bleck Engineering. Mike's a civil engineer who's familiarized himself with the site, the topography, and the engineering needs for the site, and has designed the tentative plat and the preliminary engineering for the site. He's going to go over that with you tonight. The other is Nick Patera of Teska and Associates. Nick is a landscape architect who studied the natural features of the site and has designed a landscaping plan that take advantage of those natural features and preserve and enhance those features for the ultimate subdivision that's going to be there. Also tonight, who will not be giving direct testimony, but is here to answer questions, is Dan Krill of DK Environmental Services, who is our wetlands consultant, and Joy Corona, who is with Bleck Associates, and she's the hydrology expert at Bleck. Before we get Mike and Nick started, I'd also like to point out to you that the city staff has put together a very thorough and informed recommendation and analysis of this site for you tonight for your consideration. We agree with all their conclusions and all the points that they've raised in it. And what we'd like to do, however, is to give you a little bit more detail about what the plans are. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Chuck. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Plan Commission. My name's Mike Bleck, as Chuck mentioned, and I'd like to go through a little bit of background on the property, some history of it, some discussion about the planning process and some of the natural features that influenced the design of the subdivision, touch on the stormwater management, and then at that point I'll turn it over to Nick Patera to discuss some of the landscape elements. So this property has been in the Spiel family for over 65 years. They purchased the land in 1945. This is an aerial photograph from 1946, and at that time they purchased 20 acres at the corner of Westleigh and Green Bay Road. And what's interesting is that you can see from the photograph there's not much development in this part of Lake Forest in 1946. To the north of the property you have the Lewis Swift Westleigh Estate, and to the southeast you have the two homes that were built for William Davies. Other than that, not much development out here. And then taking a look at the property, you can see right here are the two oak trees that Chuck mentioned. And what's of interest to me in looking at this photograph is I can kind of start to see the drainage patterns of these darker areas of how the drainage is coming through the property. This is the parcel that we're looking at tonight, and with all the development that's gone around it, the drainage hasn't really changed. This is 1974. The home's been in here for about 25 years. The spruce trees were planted along the driveway, and you can really start to see how much development's really occurred out here. Foster Place is in, Butler Drive is most of that's developed. The Spiels sold off some land to the east. There's a couple of houses that were built in here. You still have some vacant land to the south and a vacant parcel to the southwest. This is 1993, and in this photograph you can see here where the pond is actually now excavated. So sometime between 1974 and 1993 they went in and excavated the pond. And we had a neighborhood meeting with the neighbors last spring, and one of the neighbors indicated that this spoils that came out of this pond were brought over to build up one of the building pads for one of the houses on Green Bay Road. So now at this point they have the development to the south, and these vacant parcels are filled in. The parcel to the southwest is filled in. So really what's left now is Davies and Spiels. This is 2005, and Davies subdivision is built. So it took 60 years, and now the entire surrounding properties have all been developed. Here we are at 2010, and we're here tonight before you to discuss a 6-lot subdivision within the Historic Residential Open Space Preservation District. There's a lot of things that go into the planning process. I first got involved with this project in 2009, and we've spent a lot of time just identifying the things that influenced the design, and took our time moving through the process. So it's been over 2 years now that we've been involved with this. We did a tree inventory. There was over 300 trees that were surveyed, tagged, identified by size, species, condition, and you can see that the biggest grouping of them are the spruce trees. Oops. Some other trees out there that are the faster-growing, weedier type trees. There are a couple of significant oak trees. There were 3 oak trees on the property, and 2 of which are the heritage trees that we really identified immediately as being a focal point for the development and something that we needed to work around. One's a 38-inch oak, and the other is a 33-inch oak. In addition to that, we have the grove of spruce trees that were planted along the driveway, and they really add a nice element to the development. We completed a topographic survey, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to visit the property and walk it, and if you have, you've seen how much topography change there is on the land. These darker lines are the 5-foot contour lines, so from down at the bottom end of the property, you've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26, 27 feet of fall in about 800 feet. Most of the grade change takes place right in here where the contours are kind of tighter together. But really what happens here is we end up with higher ground around the whole perimeter of the property, with the southwest corner really lending itself for the location for stormwater management. So we'd have stormwater management in the southwest corner with the home sites up on the high ground overlooking the detention facility. Road access, looking at the geometrics of the road network out there, that we identified that we needed to align our intersection with our roadway with the intersection of Red Fox to the south to avoid having offset intersections, which are not desirable. We looked at whether to make this a public street or a private roadway, and in character with some of the other neighborhood streets on Foster, Butler, and Briar Lane over at Davies. They're more of a rural type character, and this is what we decided that we felt this fit this property a little bit better than going with a curb and gutter and more standard type of a development. If you visited the site, you've hopefully seen the home, and you've noticed that the front entryway for the house is actually facing east, and the back of the house is facing to the south and the west. So that had to be taken into consideration in placing the lot lines. Other influencing factors, like I mentioned, we did have a neighborhood meeting, which I thought we had was well attended, and we presented what we thought was a good plan to the neighbors and asked for comments and listened to their concerns. And we did get some feedback from them, and there were some changes to the plan that were made as a result of that meeting. We did, it was identified that they would like to have more buffer down here along the lot line, so we moved the path and provided a greater screening in here. There was concern about screening along the other lot lines, so that's been addressed with adding additional plantings on the landscape plan. The other thing is up here at the north lot line, the neighbor to the north was concerned about maintaining a visual barrier, visual screening between the two properties. And I think we're all on the same page that that's something desirable and that we would like to pursue for our clients as well as the neighbors to our homeowners as well as the neighbors to the north. So after that process, then we submitted our plan to the city, and we got some favorable comments back from the city and walked the property. You may have been out there and seen the stakes where the roadway is marked. And after looking at the stakes, the arborist felt like maybe we could do a little bit better in providing a greater buffer for these oak trees. So the stakes that, if you were out there, these are the old location. It's now gotten bigger. We're providing more space for those oak trees. In addition to that, we looked at this spruce grove and started to think about how do you access those lots to the east of the spruce trees without really impacting that grove of trees. And there are some locations in here where there are some openings where you can remove a few trees and keep the integrity of that oak, spruce grove intact. And so we've gone and identified even driveway locations and locations where utilities would access those lots 1, 2, and 3. Talk about a little bit about stormwater. Of all the things that we look at on this project, I think we spend more time looking at drainage and stormwater management. This is the property right here, and so what we did was try to identify how much land is draining through this property. There is some high ground on this is Green Bay Road right here and Westleigh. There is some property or some land on the east side of Green Bay Road that's high, and it drains. It can drain across Green Bay Road, 6.6 acres. And we identified that there's about 26 acres on the west side of Green Bay. So, and it's all coming to this location, which is about what it matched up with from the 1946 photograph that I showed you earlier. It's about 33 acres to here. A little bit of the property to the north, and then the 8 acres that we have on site here. So by the time you get to this pond, you have almost 42 acres draining there. In addition to that, we have a little bit of property, about 2 acres, some on-site, some off-site, that just drains west towards Butler. And then you also have some properties along Westleigh Road that are tributary to the drainage swale along Westleigh. It just continues west down to the river. It doesn't get into our detention basin. So we've kind of mapped that out. We know what kind of areas and flows we can anticipate. Taking a look a little bit closer on site, on our east lot line, we have the water that's coming on site. It comes across the property towards the basin. We've got the high ground up by the house, all trying to make its way down here. There is a pipe at the south end of the pond, and it releases out onto Westleigh Road. If you can tell, or if you've seen the pond, there isn't much freeboard on this, so that when heavier storms or even in the frequent storms, the pond gets up to an elevation where the water just spills off and goes to the west. It doesn't go out the pipe, it goes to the neighbor to the west. And there is also some drainage that comes down the side here. It doesn't even get in the pond, it just comes and it just bypasses and goes right on through. I've also, I've looked at all these maps, and I have a pretty good understanding of what I anticipate to see that I think is going to happen. But what I like to do is, if there's a really big storm, we get a really big storm, I'll go out there afterwards and take a look at it. And I did that, I think it was in last May or June. It was a huge storm. And I got to see the drainage coming through her firsthand, and I have a good handle on what's going on out there. So now we need to put together a stormwater management plan, and really what we're looking to do is to manage the quantity of water. We know there's going to be more runoff because we're going to have more impervious surface area. And we need to release that at a controlled rate. And then we're also going to look to improve the water quality as it leaves the property. So how are we going to do that? This project incorporates a number of best management practices throughout the development, starting on the new lots with rain gardens. And that would be an area set aside on each of the 5 lots. That would be, the runoff from those lots would be directed to those rain gardens to try and promote infiltration of water on the lots before it leaves the lot. We then also have bioswales and vegetated swales along the roadway. Again, what we're trying to do is promote infiltration of the water into the soils. We're using native plants to also absorb that water and to remove pollutants from the runoff. And then finally, the last step is at the detention facility. So we're looking to manage the water at the very top all the way down to the bottom of the property. Here's our detention basin, Westleigh Road, our new roadway, cul-de-sac. So we have water coming in from the east under the road, and we've got some water coming in from the north. There's this is a wetland type, naturalized type of detention facility. There's a deeper pocket right here that would allow some of the suspended solids and some of the pollutants to settle out immediately. And then there's some areas that are elevated slightly in here. So what we're trying to do is provide a long path for this water to get through here before it goes out. And it would release, there's currently a storm sewer in this location. It would be replaced with one of the appropriate size, and releasing it out onto the swale along Westleigh Road. So what this does now is, this area is now raised up in here. This runoff does not have an opportunity to cross over this lot line to get to this path that it was going to. In addition, where we had the runoff that was coming down the side of the pond before and bypassing it, this would be reshaped and regraded, so this water would all be diverted into our facility. This is over 2 acres. This is just some images of the direction we're heading on, how we think that this facility might look. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick Patera to talk about some of the landscape elements.
Thank you, Mike. This has been a collaboration between civil engineering and landscape architecture, and we've enjoyed creating a land plan that recognizes the natural systems on this property. Mike spent a long time talking about how stormwater is managed, how water flow conveys itself through the property, and now what we're really looking to do with landscape architecture and creating a complementary land plan is making sure that the systems are working together with the plant material that we're proposing so that it is really complementary to the property overall. The landscape plan that you've seen, this site plan, incorporates a number of features, but one of the first things that we really looked at is a little bit of palm reading and in understanding what's the personality of this property. A number of times when we've looked at land plans, we're trying to create some presence, some personality, and some character. This property has all of those elements already intact, and it's really working with those to try and not disturb them. The spruce grove that's in the front, the existing frame, most people who, when I explain I'm working on this property, they don't even know where it is. When you drive on Westleigh, you can't see it. Even though you're saying, oh, there's 10 acres on Westleigh Road, you get a what? Kind of an answer. They don't know that there's a pond there. We want to really retain that kind of a presence to this property so it really stays somewhat secluded in its character, and you really have a surprise when you enter, but not present ourselves openly to Westleigh Road, so that the idea of enhancing or keeping some of the existing plantings that are along Westleigh, but then amplifying that along the property's boundaries where we're berming because of stormwater management and trying to reinforce that seclusion. It was important that our perimeter boundaries, preservation of trees on the north side and new plantings on the west side and south side, and to a small portion a little bit to the east of the entrance coming in off of Red Fox. Those are new plantings that we're proposing in addition to the preservation of existing plantings. The existing driveway that comes in would be closed off. That's why this planting is in this location, and that this would become part of the front of Lot 1, Lot 2, Lot 3. The character of this property, when Mike had explained the topography, 28 feet of grade change starting from the northeast corner down to the southwest corner, it really creates a bowl or an amphitheater. And so the home sites have been located. The Spiel home is taking beginning its cue to say what a great view there is and exposure to that south sunlight and to the view that would be the focal point of the development. So really this is our front yard. What we have is about 2 acres, another half an acre in the middle of this oak grove in the center, and by the time we're done, we probably have almost 3 acres of open space in this property that's all common area that will be managed and maintained by the homeowners association, so that there will end up being walking paths. There, with the sidewalk coming down Westleigh, you'll be able to enter into the neighborhood and walk a walking path. This is a gravel pathway instead of a paved sidewalk. This would be more like a gravel pathway like you'd see somewhat like open lands would have as a crushed granite type path. That makes a loop around the pond and also then comes to a boardwalk which has an observation deck, so you could stand out in essence in the middle of nature in and amongst this 2-acre pond. Some of the other elements that I'll show you as I progress through this, I heard your beeper, Kathy, so we're moving through. are what we're doing along Westleigh Road. The evergreen plantings, which I'm showing in dark green, won't look like they're monotonous. We'll end up having some deciduous flowering trees, evergreen, kind of going back and forth. This is the walking trail in the pond. Back behind, the parkway along Westleigh will remain intact. Here's the sidewalk and entrance of pedestrian entrance and vehicular entrance opposite Red Fox. This is a cross-section looking more or less south if you were going down the hill in your car or walking down Westleigh. There's still the existing ditch, but the berm is gentle. It's slight. It's not a extreme highway type berm, but we're trying to get some elevation up for the plateau of these plantings. This fellow's walking on the path that's going around the pond in this location, and then we begin the natural vegetation that extends toward the basin itself. The plantings on the flanks east and west are really elements of what we were asked by the neighbors to make sure we maintain some privacy for their benefit as well. Entering in off of Red Fox, the idea of having somewhat of an enclosed entrance, a rock wall will contain that berm that I had just shown you. That would be here. But the idea of having a little bit of drama when you come in to the development, of having a center median type boulevard as you approach the opening, and then breaking in to the openness of the pond area. The emergent species that Mike was showing you on those fingers will be the shallow water species. Some portions of this will be open water, and then it will transition to from emergent to more of a higher prairie type planting around more low profile naturalistic planting. So that's really the theme of what's happening with this landscape, all in the kind of spirit of having one continuity of landscape. It's not overly groomed and maintained, but it's not wild and unmaintained. The boardwalk and the observation, this is a similarity to what we're proposing for the walkway that would go out in that emergent wetland area. Then the water conveyance that Mike had shown coming from the west, from the east and going west does need to come underneath our entrance drive. I'm about a quarter of the way up our drive at this point, and it would come underneath a bridge effect. This may be a box culvert with some rock, stone, and wood rail type theme that we would have introduced at the beginning at the entrance drive, and then repeat again at this bridge effect before it has an outfall into the pond, something like these sketches are showing, with the pipe going underneath, and then it's daylight on the high side, daylight on the low side. So we're really celebrating the water effect rather than trying to hide it and put it somewhere in the back. And it really is important that I mention this, because the maintenance of the water quality and the feature is going to become a backdrop that's a focal point for the development, so that I want to let you know that this is going to be important, that we are going to manage and maintain it so it's kept up to speed and not filled up with cattails over time. Mike and I can go back and answer questions, or the group can, but I conclude the presentation with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, identification of issues by staff?
Thank you.
No, you can't.
Thank you, Chairman Rice, members of the Commission. Very comprehensive presentation, but I wanted to start just stepping back and just put that to the Commission, as well as those in the audience and those who may be listening at home. I just want to step back and cover a little background on the historic residential and open space preservation district and what that means to this piece of property. And then I also want to talk a little bit about what's before you tonight and what tentative approval means. And then I'll mention a couple issues directly related to this development, but I won't repeat what's already been said. In the 80s, the city was experiencing a tremendous amount of subdivision activity. And there was concern that opportunities were being lost, opportunities to preserve both historic structures, structures designed by significant architects, as well as significant natural resources. As a result, the Plan Commission recommended and the City Council at that time put in place what is called the Historic Residential Open Space Preservation District. That was essentially an overlay that covered our zoning map and tried to address the areas where there was potential for subdivision. This particular property is within that district. At that time, it was recognized that this property not only had a house designed by Stanley Anderson, but perhaps in the case of this property, more importantly, really is a very unique property from a topographic standpoint, from significant trees, from the amount of water that travels through it. So because of that, this property is within that overlay district. What that means is that the Plan Commission has more flexibility. This property, the underlying zoning is R4. The R4 zoning district requires a minimum lot size of 60,000 square feet. When you overlay the historic residential open space preservation district on that R4, what it does is it says you can't increase the density what would be allowed, above what would be allowed if you use strictly 60,000 square foot lots. That underlying density still holds. But what it does allow the Plan Commission to do is to take the overall lot, look at what aspects of the lot are important, and essentially squeeze lots into an appropriate portion of the property in order to be developed. A really good example of this is the Middle Fork Farm subdivision. That property came in as a 200-acre site. Part of that property was actually zoned R5 for 3-acre zoning. The rest of it was zoned 1.5 acres. As you look at that area today, many of the lots in that development are half-acre lots. They're not 3 acres and they're not 1.5 acres. What was done in that case, the entire 200 acres was looked at. There was a preserved oak savanna. There was a preserved area for the gentleman's farm. There was some property that was preserved as open space and came under the ownership of the Forest Preserve. So the density that would have been permitted if the whole property had been developed was still adhered to. There are 72 lots on that property, but instead of being spread out and that whole property being chopped up, those lots were pushed up primarily into the northeast quadrant of that property. So they're smaller lots, the density is maintained. You are seeing that technique used on this property. And again, this is a very appropriate property to use this technique. The existing house, as was mentioned, is a Stanley Anderson house. The lot for that house exceeds the minimum lot size. 3 acres of the property are being preserved as common open space, much of it being used to handle stormwater that really will improve some of the off-site conditions. Although this property does not have the obligation to improve off-site conditions, in this case, it actually will do so in the opinion of our city engineering staff. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understood why these lots aren't all 60,000 square feet. The number of lots is consistent with what will be allowed on a 10-acre parcel in R4, and the variation in lot size is done specifically to try and protect the character, preserve some natural resources, and to allow the existing house to remain on the property. So that's a basics in that overlay district. I will add one more thing. As Mr. Byrum noted, as part of the final approval, because this is in the overlay district, because we're doing some unique things, this will not only be approved by a final plat of subdivision in the final phase, but also will have a special use permit that goes along with it that could place some additional conditions on that property. That will come later as part of the final phase. Second, I wanted to talk about what is before you tonight. What is before you is a request for approval of a tentative plat of subdivision. In this case, as Mr. Bleck mentioned, both Mr. and Mrs. Spiel's project team, as well as city staff, have been working on this project for over a year. All the required studies have been completed. All the required calculations have been done. Our engineering staff has looked at this plan a number of times. Although this still is in the tentative phase, the tentative plat approval process really sends the message to the property owner that, yes, this is workable, this generally is workable. There are lots of final things you need to do. We still need a final landscape plan and a final tree removal plan. We still need final engineering plans. There still will be some refinement to how the stormwater is handled. There'll still be some working through on details. But tentative approval essentially gives the property owner the green light that says, yes, this, as presented in this tentative configuration, this appears to meet all the city requirements. If you choose to recommend approval of tentative plat tonight, that recommendation will move forward to the city council. The city council would then take action on the tentative plat, and that tentative plat approval is good for 12 months. There is an opportunity for that approval to be extended by the city council for, I believe, 2 additional 12-month periods. And during that time, the property owners would finalize all the documents, pay the necessary fees, and when it's all done, this would come back before the Plan Commission. We would renotice all of the neighbors, and you would hold another public hearing on it. At that time, all the questions would have been answered, all the details would have been addressed, city engineer would have given his final sign-off. So that's the process, just to make it clear that this is something that is a normal subdivision process, that it goes through 2 phases. And then just finally, one aspect with respect to the subdivision that I wanted to mention. You are presented with a subdivision that proposes a private road. In this case, again, because of the uniqueness of the property, a private road is something that the Plan Commission has used many times in the past. I think one of the more recent ones is the Thorndale subdivision up on Green Bay Road, to really avoid creating a 66-foot right-of-way, a very wide cul-de-sac instead of a loop road as presented in this case. And the difference is that the city has certain standards. If we're going to snowplow a road, it's going to be a certain width, it's going to have a certain type of curb. However, many developments in the community have private roads, either for character reasons or the developer wanted to use a different material. So this isn't unusual. It really does allow a subdivision that does a much better job of preserving what is a unique site. I won't go through them, but in the staff report, you do have a number of conditions of approval, and they really all speak to the fact that all of these plans need to be finalized before they come back. I think with that, I will end my comments and turn it back to you for questions and clarifications.
Okay, thank you. Identification or questions or requests for clarification from commission to petitioner staff. We'll start with Commissioner Newman.
I have nothing right now.
Commissioner Culbertson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have several questions. Kathy, what is triggering the special use permit? Is it part of the overlay district requirement, or is it a condition the city is recommending be established, or?
The way the historic residential open space preservation district is written, it says in order to use this tool that gives you flexibility with respect to the subdivision, you also need a special use permit to go with that. So it isn't an option, it isn't a recommendation of staff, it's not a request of the property owner. It is something that's required because, again, it's expected that in these areas something unique is happening, something is being preserved. So it is a requirement that there be a special use permit that go along with it. depending on the subdivision. The larger, the more complicated a subdivision is. The Plan Commission saw White Stable Vineyard subdivision, and that subdivision had a lot of different parts. It had a stable, it had a winery, so that special use permit was a vehicle for providing for very unique conditions. In this case, it may be that the special use permit isn't very complicated, but it is a requirement.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask the petitioner, obviously drainage is a formidable issue with respect to this project. Could you tell me how much bigger is the detention pond going to be than it currently is? How much bigger is the footprint of that entire area?
The footprint of what's there is about a half an acre. So by the footprint size, this is about 4 times larger. In terms of volume, that existing wetland, they measure stormwater volume in acre feet. So an acre foot is 1 acre, 1 foot deep. And that current pond holds 0.34 acres, and what's proposed is around 2.8. So it's like 8 or 8.5 times larger than what's there in volume.
I assume that you, as well as the city engineers, have analyzed this backwards and forwards. Is everyone satisfied that there's adequate capacity to handle an anticipated higher rate of drainage?
I will respond, and then Mr. Bleck can respond. City engineers, again, have worked very closely with Mr. Bleck, requested additional information, reviewed the plans a number of times. Engineering staff made the point of saying, right now, as you heard, water runs from, I think, 36 acres, give or take, to the east and north, and it runs uncontrolled over this property. What is proposed will make a significant difference and is properly sized to handle water flows. Final engineering plans will need to be verified, and, you know, there's some I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed, and that Mr. Bleck is still in communication with the city engineer. But yes, the city engineering staff is confident that this is a good solution.
And one thing I'd add to that is we have a certain volume of water that we need to manage, and so we can do that, spread it over a bigger area and not have the depth of it as much, or you can squeeze it into a smaller area and have it stacked up higher. We've chosen to spread it out over a bigger footprint. And we could have gone in here and condensed this site down to the bare minimum, but we've tried to make it a bigger footprint and manage it with less fluctuation in height.
I note that I believe it's the western edge, there's a proposal to build up that side of the pond area so the water can't bypass.
Absolutely.
How does that affect the neighboring property? It seems like a very narrow strip of land, and how
Well-
high will you have to build it up?
Yeah, that would be built up. There's 20 to 30 feet between this is that gravel path that Nick spoke about. So from the edge of the path to the property line, there's 20 to 30 feet, because the path kind of meanders. And within that 20 to 30 foot buffer is where that screening would go. All the water is contained on the other side of the path. So the path is actually up more at the high end. And it serves 2 purposes. Obviously, it's there for passive recreation and walking, but it also provides a way for small maintenance vehicles to get over here if they had to do any maintenance work on the release structure or on the back end of the pond.
So there's not a sharp drop-off from this property?
Well, this property to the west is absolutely lower. I mean, that's why they're getting all that water now. And the only way we can prevent that is to stop that, to put a berm in there to prevent that water from continuing to go that way. The slopes, though, that we would go with in there are going to be in the like 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 side slopes. So you go over 4 foot and up 1. And so it's not something that we would look to go in there and have a steep drop-off. It's something that would be more of a gentle slope that you would be able to go in and landscape.
Kathy, it sounds like the tentative plat approval becomes, well, it has inertia once it's issued. What happens if the drainage issues are not satisfactorily resolved in the eyes of the city engineers? Can the process be reversed, or?
At this point, we wouldn't be bringing this before you for tentative plat unless we had really spent a whole lot of time looking at this. And in this case, there's been a number of iterations. It's been over a year. So this property has been very carefully looked at. It's not a question of whether or not this plan will work. This plan is generous. It actually provides a plan that not only addresses the stormwater, but does it in a way that doesn't pack it in so tightly on the site that we're on that edge of, is this gonna work or not? So the pieces that remain are really refinements to the engineering plans. It's not a question in our minds of, will this drainage work or not? We're very satisfied that this is a strong plan.
What size homes are anticipated on these lots? I see the lot sizes range from 44 to 80,000 square feet.
Right,
but-
the homes will follow your bulk ordinance. I mean, there is a formula as to the size that the homes can be built. And one thing, when you have lots that are, smaller than 60,000 square feet, they do suffer a little bit in the fact that they can't build as large homes as there are surrounding them. But I think that probably, I thought this question might come up on it, so I looked at the bulk ordinance for the smallest lot, which is about 44,000 square feet. And I think if you applied that ordinance, I think you'd arrive at a home that would be about 5,500 square feet under your ordinance. And then if the lots are bigger, there's, room for a larger home, but that would be the minimum.
Which one is the 80,000 square foot? Is that the existing
That's the one
home?
that has the existing house on it.
And what's the approximate size of that?
The size of, pardon?
64, right,
6,400. 6,400 square feet of the home.
okay. Kathy, the staff recommendation suggests that the homeowners association be responsible for the maintenance of all the private infrastructure, which would include the pond and the storm sewer system. What happens, what is the oversight function there? How is that oversight maintained?
In the cases of all subdivision, any private infrastructure is the responsibility of the homeowners association. On the final plat of subdivision, we will require that a note, one of our standard notes, be placed on that subdivision plat that gives the city the right to go in and do maintenance if in fact it is not done by the homeowners, and to charge them back for that maintenance. For instance, if the pond was silting up, wasn't operating as it should, the homeowners would have an opportunity to cure that problem. If not, the city would go in. So we do have that right.
So there would be routine inspections of the subdivision to see?
Normally, it becomes very clear if there's a problem with the subdivision. It's not, it is something that most homeowners associations do a very good job in handling.
With respect to the, I assume there are going to be covenants for the subdivision.
Yes, there would have to be a homeowners association, and prior to final approval, we would require a draft of the covenants to be provided, and we would review that with the city attorney.
Would that come before the plan commission, or is that not within their purview?
Portions of it probably would. It would be an outline at that point. We normally do bring the outline before, not all the legal language that, the city isn't a party to the covenant. We sign off on it. But we would bring forward the covenants that directly relate to the development.
Do the developers have any thoughts on how fencing prospectively might be handled in the subdivision, or residential landscape lighting?
One comment is petitioner is not really a developer. That's just an important thing to remember. This is the homeowner. But nonetheless, I think that we haven't prescribed fencing other than abiding by code and ordinance as far as lighting, prohibiting glare, and having specific lights that the city already allows would be the direction that we would go with this. But we haven't done anything as far as saying front yard fencing. I will say that part of the landscape, Commissioner, does end up showing the yellow area that's surrounding the road is not what you would see if you went into some other subdivision, where we are actually having native planting coming up from that road to back a distance to in what would otherwise look like the front yard, and that the walking path is defining the extent of where our native landscape stops. So there would not be any front yard fencing in that area that's also conveying stormwater and having native landscape.
Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson?
I think it's a question for the petitioner, but maybe also for staff. The property is where the property is, right? But I'm noticing where the east side of the piece of property here is relative to 320 Westleigh. It appears that it's right on next to, abuts with the house footprint, right next to it. Am I right about that? And was that considered as part of the placement of the subdividing of the pieces of property within that, and the placement of the home footprints, perhaps for lot number 1, in relationship to that east side?
I believe the map you're looking at is the vicinity map, which comes off of our GIS system.
Okay.
The footprints of the buildings there cannot be relied on. It's not meant to be a survey. So that building, I think, is misrepresented. It does not cross the property line.
But it doesn't cross it, but it's awfully close to it.
Yeah, maybe someone on the project team knows the approximate
I guess where I'm
distance
trying to
of
go
that
with this
house.
is the question of has that been considered in how the land has been laid out here, and also is that an issue in terms of proximity?
If I can back up and make sure I'm understanding the question, Mike had a image of an aerial photograph, and yes, the property to the east does have the home somewhat close. Is it? Whoop, whoop, whoop. Somewhat close. We do have. We have applied conventional setbacks to our internal lots, so that the rear lot line of our proposed home that's kind of shadowed in here is a 40-foot setback. I'll get to the context map, but
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
there's 20 feet and another 20 feet between these. These are really kind of ghost home pads, and the reason that we put these in here is really to show where the driveway locations that we labored over to make sure we weren't encroaching into the tree canopies. But your question was, the rear yard here is 40 feet, but interestingly enough, if you think about it, you're asking about this property
Right.
here. I imagine that this property is dictated by a side yard setback that would allow it to be closer to this common line where the property boundary is. We would actually be farther because this is our rear yard setback at that location. So we're not going to be, call it as close neighbors to our east neighbor as he is to our property line.
Okay, because it looks awfully close, and then so on that, maybe go
Good.
back to that one
This
prior. Well, yeah, actually, that, you can actually get the sense of what I'm trying to get to on
You're
the east
asking
side.
about this house.
Right, and it seemed awfully close to the lot
These
line.
neighbors are here.
Right.
And we do know that their home is close.
Yeah,
Their side yard setback may be compliant with the 20-foot.
right. And that was considered as part of the screening that goes on the east side, as well as the layout for lots 1 and 2.
It was to make sure that we have ample room on Lot 1 and ample room on Lot 2 to give them a reasonable front yard
Okay.
and to give them a reasonable backyard, but also make sure the structure of the home didn't start to look like it was crowding. And frankly, the in-between line
Right.
is kind of a happy medium so that we have structure, structure, structure in a juxtaposition rather than opposite each other.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we pointed that out.
Is that John? Okay. I have no questions. Public comment, public, how many? 2? Okay, could you please, well, anybody who believes that they would be speaking, if you could stand, and then I'll swear you all in simultaneously. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Okay. Fine. If you could keep your testimony to 5 minutes, it would be appreciated. Whoever stands first. Mhm. Oh, if you could go to the podium, state your name and state your address, that would be fine. Thanks.
This is Sanjeev Anand. I'm at the property 320 East Westleigh, which John Anderson had just raised about.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was not at the hearing which the Spiels did. I was out of the country at that time. So we've not been able to provide the level of input which has been claimed here in terms of insight from all the neighborhoods. And if you look at it, my property is the one which is impacted the most by this division, by the subdivision. So I have sets of questions. One is of a long-term nature, the aesthetics of my property with what's being constructed here. I'll have 3 backyards looking into my property, and I really don't have a good understanding of what level of screening is being planned here. These seem to be awfully close. I cannot govern, and I won't know what kind of backyards people put. And so if you look at it, one backyard is going to be looking into my front yard, one backyard is looking into the side of my house. And so the questions about when people driving into these houses with lights facing into our house, et cetera, those sets of issues I've got, and what level of screening which is going to be developed here, I think is of a huge concern for me. That's on a long-term perspective once the houses are built. Then I got a set of problems when this entire development is going to be built. When are the screenings going to go in place? What level of disruption is going to happen here when the lots are put together? What's going to happen when these houses are being built? There are going to be 3 different houses at 3 different points in time built next to our place. And I'd like to get some clearer understanding of the level of screenings which are going to be in place before any of that work starts. So that's a big concern of mine. The other concern clearly is around the conversation we had, I heard the first time personally today about the drainage. Yes, I do see the drainage, and whenever we do have heavy rainstorms, yes, I do have water residing on my property, on the land, and it gradually does move into the wetlands right now. So with all these additional houses being built, I do want some level of assurance that there will not be permanent, water resident on my property. Another question which I have on the wetlands is, I got to believe the city's had experience with wetlands like at Broad Acres, right? So I'd really like to understand from the city what level of experiences the city has had with maintenance of wetlands in other areas so that we can learn from those experiences when we apply here. So really 2 sets of issues. One is the huge issue about privacy, long-term, as well as the short-term issues in terms of when the lands are being prepared and then when the houses are being built. The quality of life, which it will have a huge impact on us for an extended period of time. We're not talking 1 house, we're talking about 3 houses here. and the proximity of those houses to our unit. And if you look at the entire thing, I'm the one which is impacted. Nobody else is impacted that much, more than, and so I've been surprised that we've not been drawn into any of these discussions nobody's approached me, nobody's rung my, my front door, right? And I have not been privy to any of this information. This is all brand new news to me, which I'm hearing today. So I would like, I think the commission to take a little bit of a pause, and I'd like to get some more personal briefings, I think, from the petitioner so that we can get a greater understanding of not just the long-term, but what the transition plans are and how am I being assured that my quality of life is not being impacted for an extended period of time here. We've been here for 17 years and as residents. So those are my sets of concerns.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Connie Getz. I live on Foster Place, which is to the north. I'm so glad this gentleman spoke before me because his second issue about drainage is why I wanted to speak with you. I'm not impacted directly. If you look at this drawing, at the north end of the property, you see a little bump that goes in. That is 333 Foster Place. It's a 5-acre plot that the city agreed to the gentleman that purchased it to build a home. And you see the enormous white area where the property was raised so that he could put in the foundation of his enormous home. Unfortunately, he's in foreclosure. On his property, which was part of the Swift estate, is a pond. And the city assured the neighbor, I'm just to the east of that, and John Shave is just to the west. And when the property was approved by the council, supposedly a drainage study was carefully done. The pond was massively bulldozed in the preparation for the site. The water table has enormously changed. I have a large pond now on my property since the grading of the property and the pushing of dirt from the foundation of this property towards where the pond was. That pond is spring-fed. The Baumans, who owned the property for a number of decades prior to selling it to this gentleman that had this proposition, which unfortunately he's not able to continue with, were certain that it was spring-fed. I'm wondering if the pond, this retention pond, possibly is also spring-fed, which would impact your studying of the drainage in the area. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of water behind the foundation. They did put in the basement before construction stopped. There's an enormous amount of water that comes towards Westleigh Road, towards this proposed subdivision from 333 Foster Place. You can hardly walk on this side of the property, above where you see that little indentation. Water must just flow through there, partially because of the destruction of a good part of the pond that was on the property, and the topography. So I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the council and make sure that the drainage is really studied, because we don't know what's going to happen on 333 Foster Place. It'll probably eventually be sold, possibly subdivided into 2 or 3 parcels. And there is still a pond on it, considerably smaller than it used to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
My name is Don McCoy from 190 East Westleigh, and I'm just to the east of the Spiel property. Before I start, though, I would like to commend you gentlemen on the great job you do of making Lake Forest Lake Forest. I have used Elizabeth Miller as my attorney for a good many years, and when she explained to me what you do at For No Money, I was very impressed. Thank you very much.
We're getting a raise next, yeah.
But
It's-
I'll
it's-
also-
It's a percentage raise, unfortunately.
Right, and you know,
Another
100% of
10%
nothing is still nothing. Also, I would like to say to Mike Bleck, I commissioned Manhart Consulting, which I believe you know, to take a look over the plans, and they thought the plans were very well thought out. And the reason I didn't use Mike is because I was checking to make sure he's being honest. And Manhart still has a little bit of work to do on looking over the final plans, but from what they could see, somebody had really worked on the drainage, and namely Mike Bleck and his group, and apparently have done a fairly good job. Now, I do have a few concerns. The first one my wife had, and that is we have about 20 deer that come back and forth there, and she just loves those deer, loves to see the deer when she looks out the bathroom window. But the people at Manhart told me the deer will probably go away during the construction period, but they'll be back again after the construction's done, which they said the coyotes probably won't go away, though. They'll probably still come down there. So that certainly made me feel good. It didn't, my wife doesn't believe it, but I do have a couple of concerns, though, or a few concerns. One is the path and the berm that's being built up on the west side of the Spiel property, which is, and it isn't any higher, I don't think, than what we have right now. It's what, 675 above sea level? It's about as high as it is at the highest point. But on that berm is the walking path. And the walking path currently, as they have it located in the plans, is 20 feet from the lot line. And the people up on that path can look right down into my house, and right down into my backyard, and right down into my property. And one, I'd like to see the walking path moved back to 50 feet, if that's possible. And the other one is, I'm sure that we can put all weather, when I say we, that the Spiels and the developers can put in all-weather screening there that will completely screen that out into the area of our house. I've detailed this. I had Manhart write a letter to you. So I'll try to cover these very quickly. One is, I'd like to see the path move back to 50 feet instead of the 20 to 30 feet that it is now. And it would be nice that if I could have a little path that would go up to the walking path down towards the front of my house. Small though it might be, because when my grandchildren come over, they love to sneak over there to the pond the way it is. I'd like to have it so they don't have to sneak over, but there's a little path there. Not too big, because I don't want a lot of people coming down into our yard. Okay, we didn't see any permanent fencing on the plan, and with the exception of permanent fencing along the Westleigh Road or the south edge, which I don't see that you have any, and I like it that you don't have any. I think you did a very good job so far on your landscaping. But I really don't want to see any fencing at all in that whole area. Okay, the detention facility, I don't think, you only have 6 inches for runoff, but we'll have to look at your final plans, you know, where it's running off down on the south of the overflow. And it doesn't look like to me that the weir is really down as low as what it might be. But maybe it is, maybe it's fine. Okay. Also, I'd like to make sure that the developer looks over the downstream culverts, particularly the one in front of my house, and then there's another down the road a little bit, and advises if somebody has to get in there and make them larger, or just open up the existing ones, which have over the years grown over a little bit. And
Another minute, maybe, Mr. McCoy?
okay, the last couple are the swale up in the corner of our property. Make sure it's sufficiently severe so the water goes down into the retention facility. And working hours, I have a comment in there of the working hours. I didn't realize that Saturday and Sunday were allowed in Lake Forest. I'd like to have Saturday and Sunday out during the summertime. Also, dust control. I'd like to see your dust abatement program to make sure that the dust is kept under control, and certainly noise control. When I'm not there, you can make as much noise as you want. And we'd like to see the developer drawings as they continue along. And I think this looks like a very nice subdivision. Looks very nice. Good job, guys.
Thank you. Staff response?
I don't think I have any specific response to testimony at this point, unless you have some questions.
Well, actually, petitioner could respond. That's next. You don't have to have.
I might come up with something, but
We'll
I'd
double.
offer their
How about
response
if we
first.
double back to you then, huh?
sure.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're pleased to go ahead and respond.
Yep, please.
It was, as far as the issues that came out, let me start with Mr. McCoy, because, you know, we established a talking relationship with him at the neighborhood meeting. It was just a little bit less than a year ago, and Mike spent some time talking with him, because Mr. McCoy, you know, quite frankly, is experiencing something that's a very difficult thing for somebody to go through right now with the way the physical conditions are, and clearly, you know, we've got to make it better. And that's what the intentions were in putting together the tentative preliminary engineering. But you have to keep in mind that it is the preliminary engineering, where the rubber meets the road, is the final engineering, where you take the issues on and have specific resolutions and ways to accomplish them. And we've committed to that, and we commit again tonight. We did, I talked to the gentleman at Manhart, and I know them to be a very good, responsible engineering firm, and I thought that what he put in his letter was they were legitimate questions. And I talked to Mike and Nick about it, and in preparing final engineering, the analysis and doing the engineering, we intend to look at all those issues and to try to, achieve a result that we present to you. And Mr. McCoy will and his engineer will get copies of everything we do, so they'll have the ability to interact with us. So we hope we get resolution there. The only thing that we're a little bit concerned about, but we're going to try to see what we can do, is the issue of the proximity of the path to the McCoy residence, because for this facility to work, it's got to have enough room to do its job. And if we move the path that much closer to the center point of the pond, it could cause some problems. But we'll certainly look at it and consider it in what we're doing and offer our solutions to Mr. McCoy and his engineer. The first gentleman that spoke, and I'm sorry, I didn't write down your name, and I apologize for that. But we're sorry you missed the opportunity to come to the meeting, because the idea was to get the input from all of the neighbors, and we haven't had a chance. Well, I know, but it's been a year since then, and I would have hoped that if you weren't there, you would have contacted us, but it didn't happen. That doesn't mean that your points aren't legitimate, and they are. All I can say is that in designing property that's undeveloped next to property that's developed, you have to keep in mind that we're following the ordinances of the village as far as setbacks, as far as lights, as far as construction, as far as everything. And as an owner of property next to some undeveloped property, you have to keep in mind that you're not immune from the application from the ordinances, and nobody is. That being said, we have looked at the situation and have come up with some plans as far as screening is concerned. Mike, maybe you can talk about that a little bit when I'm finished. But this is something we certainly intend to look at, and certainly something we intend to take into consideration. I would also say, because I've gone through this before with staff, there are some pretty significant ordinances as when you can do construction, dust control, all of these things that homeowners are worried about. The city has got some very strong and effective ordinances that cover these activities, and we will abide by them. We're not asking for any relief whatsoever on those points. As far as the second speaker is concerned, yes, there's no question that stormwater management is an issue here. We can't control what goes off, what takes place off-site, particularly when the water is flowing down to the Spiel property, which it appears to be here. But what we can do is, design what we do with the water that comes onto our site and how we handle it, we control it, and effectively minimize its impact on downstream properties. And, I think in our design, I hope that what the lady explained is not going to continue forever. That's a pretty bad situation. But in our design, we have to take that into consideration. What we're going to do to accommodate things that come onto the Spiel parcel, now and for the future. So these are things we're going to have to look at in the final engineering. We take the impact of any subdivision, this subdivision, on the neighborhood very seriously, and that's why we've come up with what we have. Mike, maybe you can talk a little bit about the landscaping if you want, or Nick?
I think a common question from the neighbors was, what are we putting in to screen from headlights? What are we putting in for four-season type planting on the landscape plan that'll be refined as we go from this point? We want to kind of establish a big picture here. We had anticipated putting in landscape plantings that would accommodate screening, hearing from neighbors and really trying to work together with you. the emphasis of putting in new plantings. When you're seeing me putting in dark green circles or light green circles, these are all new plantings. So opposite our west neighbor, opposite our east neighbor, to anticipate the concern about headlights. I mean, these are our big 40, 50-foot tall spruce trees. I don't think that we have a concern for the interior road, but coming through here, the driveway is specified as a specific location. Similar, we've found an opening in the spruce break here that we need to address. So in looking at that, if there's a car turning in, do we need to anticipate if there's a structure here beefing up the landscape plantings? And I think we'd be happy to talk as we go through more of a definitive plan with neighbors. The intention, just so you know, is that the plantings that would occur here would be evergreen, Norway spruce, that type of thing, going in at a spacing that would be something that would allow them to still mature, but they might be 10, 12 feet in height to start with. They're fast-growing trees, but they have some long life to them, but they might be spaced out at about the same spacing, almost as if it's a hedge. But what I don't want this to do is to start to look inappropriately formal. This is intended to look like it kind of blends in with the surroundings, which are a little bit more naturalistic with the tree canopies on both abutting properties. But the idea of having a tree planting east side running all the way up on both lots, this was east neighbor's concern of front yard. Their house is about the midpoint and backyard. We could accomplish that, and likewise to both neighbors on the west side. And I know this gentleman is here that lives north of Mr. McCoy, but that was also the idea, to extend that same neighborly planting to the west, and intermixing some ornamental tree together with evergreen trees. I think was just a way to try and break up the monotony, but I think that the emphasis could be for more of a four-season type planting.
No, public testimony's over.
Excuse me, that was our comment as far as landscape, and I think that somewhat addresses what we would like to be able to do moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Kathy, did you want to double back?
Sure. One suggestion, given the comments about perimeter plantings, both on the east side and on the west side, you may want to enhance condition number 5, so that as it speaks to the landscape plan, the final landscape plan, you provide some specific direction to look particularly at those east and west boundaries and the adequacy of screening and taking into consideration the location of adjacent homes. With respect to the property at 333 Foster, that is a problem property for us right now. It is one of a few properties in town that are in foreclosure, and those types of properties, we work through a process, an enforcement action. We try and figure out who is the responsible party, and it is a single-family lot that was approved for demolition and reconstruction, and the work simply never was completed. So there are, unfortunately, due to the economy, there are a few situations like that, and we are aware of it, and we are working to try and at least stabilize that property. Mr. McCoy's comments about really looking at the swale, looking at some downstream structures, those are pieces of what will occur even more diligently than they already have between tentative and final. There was mention of a connecting path from Mr. McCoy's property to this property. That really is an issue that probably needs to remain between the two private properties. It is difficult as part of a subdivision for the Plan Commission to require a private property owner to allow access to their property. I think there are some liability issues. Certainly could be provided, but probably not something that the city's in a position to require. Construction hours, length of overall construction time. Those are items that would be addressed during final approval. I think we do struggle with creating special construction hours for specific projects. There's always the balance of people wanting the work to get over and done. There's always the issue of weather. But we can certainly encourage the property owners to have that discussion with the neighbors, and if there's a proposal on how to work through that, it could certainly be part of the subdivision approvals, be part of the special use permit in this case. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. Final questions from commission to petitioner or staff?
Questions or comments?
Questions?
Have
You have none?
comments there?
Comments later, yeah, Paul? Commissioner
Just
Culberson?
one question of the petitioner. Do you have any thoughts about keeping the neighbors in the loop as this project proceeds?
We do. We've already committed to Mr. McCoy through his attorney, and if any neighbors would, like to keep open a dialogue with us, we'd be glad to do it. I think we just have to work out a format for doing it that's reasonable for them and reasonable for us, but certainly we value their input.
Thank you. Kathy, what's the city process for keeping the neighborhood informed of what's going on?
We would do our standard public notice before this came back to you for final approval.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, Kathy, I had a question by what you just said on item number 5. You said enhance that condition item, or condition 5. So what did you mean by that? That actually happens at the final approval, or you're asking us to do that? Or are you suggesting that we might want to do that now?
You might want to add language to the condition. The condition currently reads, the final landscape plan shall be reflected on the approved grading plan and drainage plan submitted to the city, subject to review and approval by the city arborist and director of community development. Might add, in particular, the final landscape plan shall be reviewed to assure that adequate screening is provided, in particular to the, on the east and west property line, to assure that concerns raised by neighboring property owners at the public hearing are addressed, or something to that effect. Just calling out a particular area that needs particular focus based on that.
And I have a question for the petitioner, and that is, there was a question raised by Mr. Anand about the timing of when the screening planning would go in, and that wasn't mentioned in your response.
Sorry, that was not an intentional evasion.
No, I know, I'm not saying that, I'm just.
But in the development, what's going to happen is Mr. Spiel has a year to come up with his final plan, and then there's always the potential for extensions of that time. Ordinarily, first of all, we don't know what's going to go in as far as screening until the final plan is approved.
Right.
And usually, for financial reasons and other reasons, screening doesn't go in until land development starts. You don't do it 2 years in advance. So it'd be, right, the screening, I think, would probably be part of the final subdivision process and the subdivision agreement that's worked out with the city, and the timing for doing that would be in that agreement. But it would be during the development process.
And I would just add that that is something that a special use permit could address. The special use permit could address particular gaps and say that within 6 months of approval, or depending on the season, plantings need to occur in certain areas. We would want to make sure that we're not planting in an area that needs to be regraded or is part of the storm drainage. But I think there are ways that we can address that. And maybe, again, as part of that condition 5, maybe you include something that says, give us some information about basing of plantings. And that it doesn't say exactly what's going to happen when, but it at least calls it out that it's something that we need to discuss as part of the final review.
Thanks.
I have no final questions. Commission discussion and comment? Commissioner Newman?
I like the plan for the most part, except if you could go, Mr. Bleck, could you go back one slide, the previous slide? Had the surrounding area. There you go, that's fine. This is, if you look at Butler, Foster, and Green Bay Road, this property lies at the heart of that particular area, and everything around it is 1.5 acres or larger. And I understand the desire to redevelop some of these larger lots around the city, 10 acres and whatnot. The zoning in the area is 1.5 acres, but we have an overlay district that allows a little bit of horse trading. And I think we always end up with maybe 1 or 2 lots too many crammed in here. And I think it diminishes the lots around this particular redevelopment. I'm particularly troubled by lots 1, 2, and 3, which in my mind ought to be 2 lots instead of 3. And I just think it's too squeezed in here to really be in accord with the area around it. And that's an issue that I have with this, and I'm not sure I can support the petition here.
Further comments? Commissioner Culbertson?
That was a good point, Tim. I think the project is very well thought out, and I think that particular care has been given to the engineering and the landscaping. And I would be generally supportive of tentative approval, but I'm taken with Commissioner Newman's thought there that 1, 2, and 3 might be better served if it was just 1 and 2.
Okay.
Those are my thoughts.
That's your comment? Commissioner Anderson?
I like the plan. My worry is about the screening, and I've indicated that throughout my comments and questions on east and west side. And if that is sufficiently conditioned in, I guess, the tentative plan and the final plan, I think I would be supportive of this.
I guess it's my turn. I'm supportive of it. I don't have a problem with 1, 2, and 3. I think 6 is fine. I understand the Commissioner Newman and Commissioner Culbertson's kind of support. And it might not fit the surrounding, but it's very appropriate for what we have here, in my estimation. On the screening, I mean, that'll be done. I think I would ask the petitioner to certainly meet with Mr. McCoy and I might mispronounce your name, Mr. Nod, to work that out. I also believe that screening is a joint responsibility. I don't think you can come in and demand a developer has total responsibility for that. And I think neighbors need to work together. And that would be my response to that. But I certainly don't have any problem with the tightening up of the language on the restrictions to do that. Those are really the basis of my final comments. We're kind of faced with a situation here of a split vote. Kathy, is there a way to move forward with tentative approval, which would include the staff's recommendations plus Commissioner Anderson's comments, really, which was your comments, but keep open the Lot 1, 2, 3 issue and give them tentative approval?
I think it depends how strongly Commissioners Culbertson and Newman feel. Certainly, we have moved subdivisions of this type forward in the past with language asking the petitioners to consider, in this case, it seems to be a reconfiguration of the lots on the east side from 3 to 2. But I don't know if the two commissioners who identified that as a concern would be comfortable with that, or whether they want to see that as a requirement. And it also leaves it a little bit up in the air for the petitioners. They could certainly do some further work and assess sizes of surrounding lots and bring that back, either supporting, reducing 3 to 2 or making the case to retain it for 3. So you could condition it with that provision, that they give that consideration, but again, it's really your call on on how strongly you feel.
Yes. I'm going to make a final comment, then I'm going to open it up again. There's been just a whole lot of work done here by petitioner, and I hate to see him, I personally hate to see him go home empty-handed, quite frankly. As I was reviewing this, I hadn't anticipated the 5 versus the 6. I don't know what I would have done differently. I wouldn't have done anything differently anyhow. I would have just shown up and play this out and see how it worked out. But I'd hate to see him go home empty-handed. I think I'd like to see some sort of compromise, and if Commissioner Newman still feels strongly about it, and supported by Commissioner Culbertson, that move it forward, but have ongoing. But I mean, this is just tentative. It's not final. So there's a lot of, to me, there's wiggling. Okay, but let me just. To me, there's wiggling room, and then you're right. I've spoken enough. So.
Well, no, I'm not trying to dispute that, but I think if you tentatively approve 6, there's no way to really revisit 5.
I'm not tentatively approving 6. I'm saying we're giving tentative approval for them to move forward and somehow keep the 5 or 6 issue open.
I'd be amenable if there was some way to move forward with that issue open. I'm very respectful of the engineering here. I think a lot of work has been done. I think changing lots 1, 2, and 3 to lots 1 and 2 is a very minimal change, but it has enormous impact in the visual character of that particular subdivision in relation to the lots around it. And I think that's not to be overlooked. So splitting those 3 lots into 2, I don't think changes much, if at all, about the drainage or the engineering or any of the other work that's already been done. So I'm certainly willing to listen, but I think visually it's an important point.
Mr. Chairman? I realize I'm out of order, but this didn't come up until we did.
Fine. I understand. Go ahead.
I'd just like to point one out, because you have to be cognizant about the impact that this is going to have on surrounding homes that are built to a certain density. And a slide that Mike had tells a lot, and we didn't dwell on it or spend too much time on it because we didn't know it would be an issue. But Mike, could you get the slide up and explain what it shows on surrounding properties?
property is about the same size to the west of us. There are 8 homes. And if you look at the box to the southwest, there's 8 homes on those lots too. So we did take a look at it, and we think that it fits in context with the neighborhood. There's 6, 8, and 8.
As much as or more on 10 acres as we're asking for.
Well, there's a barrier.
Okay, that's, all right,
Okay.
fine,
I just want to get.
fine,
Thank
fine,
you.
fine.
You want to comment on that? I would say that the
It's-
properties to the east are all acre and a half. The properties to the west, you're splitting 4 and 4 with a road between those. I'm not sure that's a fair comparison. So I'm not really as interested in the properties to the south. The properties to the east are all acre and a half, and that's the character that I think needs to blend in here. And the north. And the immediate west before Butler. So it's really the area bounded by Green Bay, Foster, and Butler that I'm most interested in.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
Thank you. One clarification on the suggestion I made that you could leave that open. Commissioner Newman actually made a good point. If you approve a tentative plat with 6 lots, you are vesting some rights in the property owner, so long as they can meet all the conditions. So I guess that gave me some pause when you raised that. If you want to leave this open, probably the way to do this is to approve a 5-lot tentative plat, saying that the commission is willing to give further consideration of a 6th lot at the time of final approval. So I didn't want to mislead you.
I could be comfortable with that.
And you raised a good point, and I missed
Well, I mean,
that.
that
Okay.
preserves the
Okay.
2 options in a better way.
Okay. Commissioner Culbertson?
Kathy, is the total area of the 6 lots right now could be divided into 6 60,000 square foot lots? Even.
This property could be developed with much less open space and could be developed with 6
Oh, okay.
lots.
So the footprints that are in place do not comprise 6 times 60,000 square feet?
No, the lots are smaller for the purpose of preserving the 3-acre open space and to allow the existing Stanley Anderson home to set on an appropriate lot.
What is the size, I take it lot 1 is the smallest lot? And 1, 2, and 3 are probably in that order, the smallest.
They're equal.
They're equal?
1 and 2, 1, 2, and 3 are approximately the same thing. The benefit was given to, as Kathy had said, to preserve and set aside the existing Stanley Anderson home on an 80,000 square foot lot. But 1, 2, 3 are almost identical in size. I think they're just slightly over, I think they're 44,000 and change,
And an acre is approximately 40, right? Is that right?
43,560.
I hadn't thought of this till Commissioner Newman brought it up.
Further
I'm taken
comments?
I'm taken
Well,
with
this
his
is a
argument.
tentative approval.
Understood.
We could make a motion for 5, and that would leave open the possibility of 6. Is that right, Kathy? If the commissioner came back, if the petitioner came back and reapplied for 6,
Yes,
what would be the process for getting 6 approved at that point?
If you approved a plat for 5 lots, and you don't have a plat for 5 lots in front of you, so that really is something that should come back before you, because we don't have you are granting tentative approval of a plat. It doesn't vest rights for them to develop, but it is saying this generally works. But yes, if you gave tentative approval to a 5-lot plan, and there was a proposal to change that in the final review phase to 6 lots, the Plan Commission could allow that. But I agree with you, it would be much harder for the commission to take away a lot between tentative and final, unless there, some new facts came up or
So if we approve 5 tonight, they come back and reapply for 6?
If
Or
you
they accept
approved
5
a
or they
tentative
reapply for
plat,
6?
if you approved a tentative plat for 5 lots, and you approved that with language that said, at the time of Plan Commission consideration, 6 lots were proposed, we are willing to consider that as part of final approval. You've left that door open to add back the 6th lot.
Clarify the process just real quickly for me. If they accept 5, then they can move forward. If they want to reapply for 6, they have to, what's the process?
Because you don't have a 5-lot subdivision, you don't have a 5-lot plat in front of you, I am uncomfortable with you approving a motion tonight that grants tentative approval of a 5-lot plat that doesn't exist. So if you want to go 5 lots, I think you should provide that direction to the petitioners tonight, continue the matter. They could come back before you, perhaps you'd have a few more members. They could come back before you and say, here's a 5-lot plat, we heard you, this is what we're proposing. Or they could come back with a 6-lot and say, we've looked at it, here's some further research, here's some further support for 6 lots, we still want you to consider 6 lots.
Okay.
Kathy, on behalf of the petitioner, I agree with you.
Please,
Oh, I'm sorry.
you may be seated.
Okay.
Commissioner Anderson?
I'm thinking.
Well, I'll make my comments. I am perfectly okay with a 6-plot subdivision. I think, could you go to an 1.5 acres? Sure. And the reason that they probably didn't is because we've asked them to set aside open lands. So we've now backed them into a corner where they've got a perfectly good plan that has 6 lots, because that's what staff has directed them essentially to do. That's number 1. Number 2, this is a perfectly good plan by a perfectly good developer. And to ask, there's an economic effect on this, that you're asking them to take a haircut by reducing one piece of property in this economic environment where they're aggressive enough to come forth with a perfectly acceptable proposal. And I think we ought to support it. That's one comment. If this group does not want to do that, I'm the chairman, and I go along with what everybody says. But what I would suggest then is that we postpone this to have another meeting. We're missing 3 commissioners here. I think it is unfair to this developer to move forward with a 5-plot plan. I would, if we have a hung jury here, I would just suggest that we postpone this and move it to the March meeting.
If I could pipe in, I would be supportive of that, because I think this issue should be vetted in front of the full Plan Commission of 7 members, or at least 5, where we would not end up with a split vote
Right.
among 4 members.
Right.
So I think we do owe it to the petitioner to continue this motion for another meeting, when we can have a better understanding from the other commissioners how they feel on the issue.
Commissioner Culbertson?
I agree.
Yeah, I would agree as well.
Kathy, we're going to move this to the March meeting.
And you should do that with a motion to continue.
So moved.
Wait, go ahead.
You may,
You can make the motion.
well, you would want to leave the public hearing open, because I suspect you may have some testimony related to supporting either 5 lots or 6 lots, but maybe you want to close the public hearing except with respect to the issue related to the number of lots. That way you don't need to hear an entire presentation on this again. We will assure that the commissioners who aren't here tonight preview the meeting, review this meeting so that they're able to fully participate. And that might, I'm just thinking at your March meeting, you have the hospital coming before you as well. So you wouldn't have to replay this whole evening, is my point.
Right, okay. I'm okay with that, and to Mr. Knott, I would say, I did cut you off. I would say that you could make your feelings known, but the letter to staff, which we will, if, after you meet with them or whatever, if you have further comments, I would suggest that your way of getting those open with what we're going to do is with a written response, a written letter to staff, which will be shared with every one of the commissioners before the meeting. Are you all right with that, Commissioner Anderson? Would you like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to continue the petition till the March meeting under the conditions previously stated.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You're welcome. The next item on the agenda is consider public hearing and action, considering a periodic update of the City of Lake Forest official zoning map. I don't need to ask for any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts, I don't think. So we will just, why don't we just go to, Kathy, why don't you just take us through this, and then we'll go to final discussion comment, okay?
Thank you, Chairman Reisenberg. This is a matter that comes before the Plan Commission periodically. State statutes do require that from time to time the city readopt the official city zoning map. Because the City of Lake Forest doesn't see many zone changes. We don't do this very often. The map in front of you is dated, or was last updated, I believe, in 2009. The only change that is reflected on this map is the rezoning that occurred at Elloa. Elloa Park was rezoned to open area. That is the only change that has occurred since the last time this was updated. So that has already been approved by the City Council. This action actually formally incorporates that and allows us to issue a new zoning map with the date of 2012.
Comments? Motion?
Let me just ask a question. Are there any really significant areas that should be looked at as possible zoning changes?
Actually, adjacent to Elloa Park, we've talked to both Lake Forest Open Lands and the Forest Preserve. They each have property, Forest Preserve has property to the west of the open area. Well, I'll. As long as you have time, I'll put this up there.
You trying to catch a plane tonight, or?
No. No, but I wish I was. Mr. Curveball.
I know you're in sport of shorter term limits.
We only got 3 months. It's gonna be a long 3 months.
Once in 6 years I did there.
For some reason, I'm not getting this to pick up this sheet here.
Yep. Here comes technical support. Thank God.
This is Middle Fork Farm subdivision. This is the hospital, just as a point of reference. Waukegan Road is here. This is the change that occurred since the last official map was updated. This is Ellowa Park, city-owned. We went ahead and rezoned that from residential to open area. The other zone changes that should occur, and we have contacted Lake County Forest Preserve, they own property in this area, and Lake Forest Open Lands owns this property. The light green is RA, so it still reflects residential. This lighter color here is R4, so that still reflects residential. So this should be a large block of dark green. Not a critical, given the ownership in Lake Forest Open Lands and the county. It's not going to be developed as anything, but to update our map, we have encouraged them to come forward, and we will contact them again and try and move them forward to do that. But that is really the only outstanding area.
Okay.
Any other questions on that?
But just to clarify, that's a separate process that has to be done yet? in other
Yes.
words. Okay.
The actual zone change process, a request for a zone change will come before the Plan Commission. You would make a recommendation on a specific change of zoning for a specific property. That would then go to the City Council. They would adopt an ordinance rezoning a specific parcel. That then would, the rezoning would take effect. It wouldn't get officially incorporated onto our map until we brought the map back to you.
Okay, all right.
And if we have a number of zone changes, we will do it every year at this time. In recent years, there just hasn't been much activity in that vein.
I will entertain a motion.
Some of you guys have some.
I will entertain a motion, Mr. Commissioner Culbertson.
I move that we adopt the updated zoning, and send it to City Council.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Public testimony on non-agenda items?
Good evening. Audience of one, I guess. My name is Richard Riley. You may remember we have a petition that's pending before you for a special use on a telecommunications structure near the Barrett College campus. I don't mean to step on Kathy's, I'm not sure what Kathy's going to tell you tonight. I have a question of how the wireless task force that has been commissioned, and I understand they've had their first meeting, is going to interact and work with the Plan Commission going forward from here. Seemingly, the City Council has approved an ordinance which contemplates the demolition of the old main building, which means that the wireless facilities that are located in that building are going to need, a place, to move their antennas to. I'm not sure what the time frame is, but we're very interested in working with the Wireless Committee and with the Plan Commission going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kathy, could you answer? I mean, I could go. Oh, good. Go ahead.
There was an ad hoc wireless task force formed. That committee is chaired by Second Ward Alderman David Moore. That committee met once. It held a an introductory meeting, set its meeting dates for the next couple months, and talked about their methodology, how they want to proceed. They did talk about having a meeting where they would invite in possibly providers, tower building companies. They have not yet scheduled that, but as I have informed Mr. Riley, we will certainly make him aware of that if it gets scheduled. The city council has given first reading to a special use ordinance, a special use permit ordinance for Patera. They will hear that next Tuesday and consider it for final reading. Although that ordinance does contemplate demolition, it has a number of conditions that need to be addressed. One of those conditions, you may recall, specifically says that any proposal for replacement wireless facilities will need to come back to the Plan Commission. So you will be involved. I would also note that Commissioner Karras, who is not here tonight, is actually a member of that wireless task force, so he is a connection for you as well.
Okay, so he's on that. Let me see, a couple of things. So they will come back to us, and then a decision has to be made, certainly before demolition, to not only determine how we're going to do the wireless for the second ward, but also where it's going to be.
And what technology will be used.
And when technology will be used. And then it must be in place before demolition occurs. Yes?
Perhaps there could be some temporary solution.
I mean, we can't have the second ward without.
Correct.
Without
Correct.
cell phone coverage, right?
And
is
the
what I'm
ordinance
saying.
contemplates that.
Right,
The
okay.
building isn't going to be dropped and the whole southwest quadrant.
Oh,
go
yeah,
down.
by the way, are we gonna do a tower or not? And if so, where are we gonna put it? Yeah, right,
Correct.
okay.
And,
Okay.
and the wireless task force is aware that that is an issue that makes the timing of their deliberations more important. It is a short-term task force, so it's not a task force that's expected to be in place for 6 months or a year. It is expected to do its work, make its recommendation quickly, and move forward.
How many people are on the task force, do you know? Okay.
5, I believe.
5? Okay. Okay. All right. Hope that answered your question. I'll certainly entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second?
All in favor? Let's go home.